We recently wrote an article in the Journal of Economic Methodology about something we think may be of wider interest. Think of it as a bug report for economics, a possible explanation for why economists who do technically brilliant work that nicely captures systematic regularities in the data all the same can repeatedly reach conclusions about the real world that are unfounded and just plain wrong. The main idea is that when you evaluate research, you need to focus on the specific claims that are made and assess how well each of them is justified. That doesn't sound particularly interesting, but let's take an example. Here's an academic article. Such an article will typically make a lot of different claims, and they will be of very different types. Some have to do with the formal properties of the model. Is the mathematics correct? Are the concepts fully worked out and consistently applied? Is the model elegant, consistent, messy? Other claims have to do with the model's ability to predict. How well does the model fit the data? How well does it predict out of sample? Is it consistent with stylized facts? And then there are claims about the reasons why things happen. What factors cause X to happen in the real world? How can we empirically identify, establish and quantify the causal impact? What's the mechanism that's involved? What's the evidence that the mechanism that you have been describing is actually out there in the real world? And is that mechanism enough to make X happen? Are there any alternative explanations of why X happens? Do those other explanations supplement or counteract your mechanism? Or maybe they're just plain wrong? And finally, there are claims about welfare. How will policies A, B, or C affect the welfare of different groups? And what do you mean by welfare? Do you mean income, wealth, happiness, health, something else? Is it something we can measure? How well are you actually able to predict changes in this measure of welfare? And how do we separate preferences in the sense of what makes you better off from preferences in the sense of what you choose? This is important because specific claims made require different types of evidence depending on the type of claims that we are looking at. For instance, say that you've written an article that contains a sophisticated, elegant and innovative formal model, and you claim that this is a major step forward in pure theory. To examine this claim, you read through your article to see if you've provided or cited the evidence necessary to support that claim, and you have. However, at the end of the article, you also discuss policy implications of your work, and you claim that your model shows that some policy which is being discussed on the news would actually cause harm to consumers. The evidence required to support this claim, however, is missing. There's no evidence that the mechanism in your model exists or is important in the real world. There's no evidence that your model captures welfare in any measurable, credible sense of the term, and so on. So an article may be really good in supporting an important claim X while making other claims Y not backed up by evidence or good arguments. And if an article that provides good evidence for an important claim is a good article, then a good article can still contain other claims that are wrong, perhaps even absurd, and that are presented without even an attempt to provide relevant evidence. This may be obvious in principle, but we don't think it's obvious in practice. We took the literature on rational addiction, which is a growing field in economics. It's regularly published in top journals. It's the standard approach to understanding addictive consumption in economics. And all these four types of claims are being made in the literature. In terms of formal theory, these models were able to generate unstable consumption from rational, forward-looking choice made from stable preferences. This claim is pretty well supported. The resulting models are also able to reproduce some stylized facts of addictive consumption, especially if you use aggregate data. In our view, the evidence that these models are a good way to capture regularities and patterns in market data is there, but it's mixed. Turning to causal claims, however, the claim that real-world junkies, smokers, binge eaters are just implementing a forward-looking plan that rationally takes into account how today's cigarette, needle or milkshake will alter tomorrow's health and tastes, that seems highly questionable and very likely wrong. There's both evidence and arguments speaking against the claim that beginning smokers smoke more and more because they maximize discounted lifetime welfare given accurate information about the effects of tobacco, and that they have found that to seemingly get hooked is the optimal way to reconfigure their tastes into that of a chain-smoking adult. Similarly, we would argue that these researchers have so far failed to provide evidence for the claim that addicts are best off being addicts. You might say that you could care less about rational addiction theory, but we believe it tells us something important about the economics discipline. Think about the food industry and how it turns cattle into hamburgers. If we have reason to think people are getting ill from the hamburgers, the food industry will test the food product for the bacteria E. coli. Not because all strains of E. coli are highly dangerous, but because they are relatively easy to find. And if E. coli is present, then this indicates fecal contamination of the food, And with fecal contamination comes a host of nasty things that are more difficult, time-consuming and costly to test for directly. The E. coli bacteria thus functions as an indicator bacteria. It tells us that the control processes we are using are not good enough. In the same way, you can think about research. Researchers write articles that are fed into the discipline of economics, and out comes peer-reviewed, accepted claims in established journals. If we have reason to think that the claims coming through this process are systematically flawed, we may look for absurd claims, not because these are necessarily super important in and of themselves, but because they are relatively easy to spot if they are there. If absurd claims such as those of the rational addiction literature are found, this indicates, well, at least flawed control processes in economics. They tell us that we are currently unable to weed out even strikingly wrong claims from even top journals. If such claims make it through, then there will likely be a host of other causal and welfare claims that are less obviously absurd, but equally poorly supported, and these may be taken far more seriously than they deserve, and they may have quite negative real-world consequences. Our hypothesis is that this is caused by a blind spot in the culture of economics. Even if economics start out making all errors equally, their errors may be spotted and caught more often by their peers when they concern formal errors in models or incompetent econometric fitting and prediction exercises than when they concern claims about the real world and welfare effects. They may also pick up a feeling that claims of causal and welfare insight require far less scrutiny. For instance, there are incantations that in some seminar settings work almost like magic spells that can be used to deflect criticism against your claims of causal and welfare insight. These are standard assumptions. This is just an as-if theory, or the realism of the assumptions is irrelevant, are examples. Over time, this allows such claims to piggyback on elegant, formally consistent models that fit stylized facts. We freely admit that this is just a hunch. However, we try to find a way to examine the hunch, or hypothesis if you will, by sending a survey to all published researchers within the rational addiction field. The answers, while no hard and conclusive evidence, seem indicative of, or at least consistent with, such a blind spot. When asked whether the literature on rational addiction theory supported a specific claim about pure theory, 74% agreed that this was the case. At other points in the survey, we asked whether the theories should be consistent with various kinds of evidence, and whether they actually were consistent with such evidence. And if you bring in the answers to these questions, 31% both supported the pure theory claim, agreed with the need for the relevant evidence in principle, and believed that it was there in practice. This means that 58% seem to be overconfident in that they accept the claim without believing the required evidence is there, or without realizing the type of evidence needed for this kind of claim. Moving on, 44% believe that the models reproduce regularities and data patterns, and 20% believe this in a supported way, which gives you 54% overconfidence. However, although 39% believe the models give practical insights relevant to those who wish to treat addictions, there was, according to our admittedly crude measures, 72% overconfidence on this measure. And while 56% agreed the literature could tell us about the welfare of addicts under various policies, 80% of them seem to be overconfident in this. It thus seems that the evidence required for claims of pure theory and as-if prediction may be better understood than the evidence required for claims of causal and welfare insight. We realize fully that this is not the final word, and that the survey in some ways is more like a pilot than a conclusive piece of evidence, but we would claim that our hypothesis at least merits further research, and that in any case we should take care that claims about the real world are not allowed to piggyback on well-supported claims about pure theory or on a model's ability to fit regularities in data. When you evaluate research, specify the exact claims made and then examine whether that specific type of claim is supported by relevant and sufficient evidence. Thank you for your time.